and I just have this question because I've heard recently that people have taken like multiple attempts to get the grade they want. What's the largest amount of attempts that you've heard of someone taking the LSAT?
That's a great question. I have heard from admission officers of people applying having taken it 10 times or more.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was talking with a dean of admissions at UCLA yesterday, and he was telling me about that. And then, of course, like that's far too much. That starts to look a little bit shaky. Like maybe you don't know about how to decide whether you're ready to take it or not. But
Yeah.
so that you definitely don't want that. I think that as the LSAT is being administered more frequently, and because it used to be only 4 times a year, now it's going to be 9 or 10 times a year going forward. And
Wow.
that means many more opportunities to take it. So people will take it more. Plus, law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only consider the highest score.
What?
Yeah, is that new to you?
Not what I have. That is not what I have read. That is not what I've been told. Are you serious?
Yeah, there's a lot of mythology around it, so I'm not that surprised to hear you be surprised by it. It's this outdated mythology or outdated information that kind of keeps coming up. It used to be that law schools did average. That was before 2006, when the American Bar Association required law schools to report the average LSAT score of their matriculating students. But that changed in 2006, which is, of course, over 10 years ago now by a long shot. Now, in 2006 going forward, they said they will only require law schools to submit the highest LSAT score of their students. And so that's what they care about for their rankings. And so now law schools only take the highest. So if you got a 150, then a 170, it's like you got a 170.
Some people need to update their books.
I know. It's the most frustrating thing. I'm like having these conversations every day with people, and I'm like, what? And some of the schools don't even change their websites. It's like they want, part of it, I think, is they want to give this appearance of being holistic. Like it sounds more scientific to take the average, but that's not what they're considering. That's not their incentives. Their jobs are based on how their schools do in their rankings. When they're looking at applications, they want to see who's going to boost us up in their rankings. The way to do that is by taking the people with the highest LSATs and the highest GPAs.
Okay, yes, and that also brings me to my next question. Perfect. So speaking of that, I've heard that the median for like the LSAT score is kind of, I guess, dropping. And there's been like a lot of different shifts in the admissions process due to people like not really applying for law school anymore. So what do you know about that?
Yeah, they're definitely, I did see some headlines a little while ago about people with 170 plus LSAT scores actually not being as likely to apply because maybe they have other options, and there's obviously a lot of changes in the legal field in terms of employment. So that is changing. I think that it's gotten a little bit less competitive with the drop in the number of applicants. But obviously for the top 14, it's always super competitive. For tier 1, it's always somewhat competitive as well. And there is always a benefit to having a higher LSAT score because it gets you into a better law school, or it gets you more scholarship money. And so I was talking with another student recently, earlier today, who she got a full ride to law school. And it wasn't like a top 14 law school, but still being able to graduate without debt, that opens up opens up far more employment options for you. You don't have to take the big law corporate job when you graduate. You can pursue what you really care about, why you wanted to go to law school in the first place. And so even just a single point more can make the difference, getting into a top 14, getting into a better law school, or getting tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money. So it's crazy, but it's worth retaking if you think you can do better for that reason, even just by a point or two.
Right. Speaking of a point or two, I read in the book that 1 point or two between two students can be very like definitive of like who gets in. That's on the point. That's crazy.
It is, and the funny thing is that there's a score band or a margin of error with your LSAT score. Like, let's say that you deserved a 160. Let's say that's where you were at. On any given day, you could score 3.5 points higher or 3.5 points lower, just based on randomness, based on what appears on the LSAT that day, or plus like how you're feeling that day, right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
let's say one day you get a 160, next day you get a 164 or a 163. How many more doors would a 164 open up for you than a 160 would?
So true.
So that's why I would say to you, let's say you're taking in June. You mentioned you're taking in June. So you take it in June. Let's say you get that 160. You might want to consider taking in July as well, because there's only about 5 weeks between those two test dates. So all you've got to do is stay fresh on the LSAT, maybe take another timed exam a week for the following 5 weeks in between. You then take it in July. maybe you do 3 to 4 points better. If you do, that's awesome. And if you don't, no big deal, because law schools don't average multiple LSAT scores.
That's so wild.
It's crazy. And then for those in the fall, same thing. There's LSATs in September, October, November, all just a month apart from each other. And because they don't average and because the gap between them is so small, it really is easy to retake. And this is something new this year. It used to be LSAT was only 4 times a year, spaced 2 to 3 months apart. It's a lot more to take on a 2 to 3 month retake study plan than for 1 month.
Yeah.
But now it's possible, and I'd recommend it. Why not? Get a better LSAT score, get into a better school, get more money, even just through luck alone. And then obviously if you study, you can do even better.